I'd love to thank the eloquent, and I'm also groping for a word, tributaries? No. I am so moved and inspired by the vision then that every single one of them showed, and I am really, really humbled as a result of that. And with this, I decided not to try to give an eloquent acceptance talk, but in fact to do what I do every time somebody invites me to speak, which is to say, I would rather not do a monologue. I would much rather engage in at least a dialogue, and often I will be involved with multiple interlocutors, and I'm so honored to be able to have a conversation with Michael, my dear friend and ally and colleague. And if I can just say one other thing to thank every single one of you here, I quite frankly had not heard of ACTA until about 2018, when my hate speech book came out and the Cato Institute was doing a book launch event for me. Michael kindly came with his older daughter, introduced himself to me, and we just really hit it off. Then I learned about some of the wonderful work that this organization was doing in a space that then was relatively unoccupied. I mean, we had FIRE and a number of other organizations, but the flurry of new academic freedom organizations that have been formed by other constituents of the university community, the students and the faculty members, those did not yet exist. And at that time, and for quite a few years, the major element in the university community that was advocating for classical liberal values, for academic freedom, free speech, civil discourse, were the alumni and the trustees. And I find that fascinating because in the history of the struggles for academic freedom in this country, starting in the 19th century and flourishing with the founding of the AAUP in the beginning of the 20th century, the alumni, in particular their trustees, were, dare I say it, kind of a negative factor, right? Who were exercising their economic power and their managerial power to make sure that faculty members did not propound ideas or engage in research or teaching that was inconsistent with their economic interests. And to me, this is like the beauty of separated powers and checks and balances, that when it came to a point that the trustees were having a negative impact, the faculty organized through the AAUP. And then a vacuum developed where the faculty were no longer standing up vigorously for free speech. Shockingly, as FIRE discovered, students who had long been clamoring for free speech, including through the historic free speech movement at Berkeley, which is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year, students were turning the other way and were demanding more and more administrative restrictions on free speech. And into that very changed environment, the alumni and the trustees, at least the ones who are affiliated with ACTA, became a very positive, not only a check, but I would say a goad now to the other elements of the campus community, goading the faculty and the students and the administration to live up to their ideals. So I owe all of you such, on behalf of my students and my colleagues, and really everybody in the country, because as the United States Supreme Court has said, academic freedom is something that is important and is protected, not solely for the benefit of faculty members, not even solely for the benefit of members of the university community, but rather for the benefit of our entire society, because we all depend on universities staying true to their truth-seeking mission. So everybody who cares about that in this country really owes an enormous debt of gratitude to all of you. I can't thank you enough.
Nadine, thank you. We sometimes ask in the office, I know I've told you this before, when we get to those places where free speech, civility, and order seem to be in collision, WWNS, what would Nadine say? And it's not that we always follow that little voice, or sometimes you've been very generous, the voice on the telephone, but most of the time we do. But it's given us a very sure guide to the contours, the complexity of the questions we face. I have to back up and speak about the selection process. Every year, the staff and the board wait rather anxiously for the decision of our Merrill Award Selection Committee, a very eminent group of people. And for those of you who are a little older, it's kind of like, what teenagers used to do, sitting by the telephone waiting for it to ring. This was before the internet and instant messaging. And I have to say, we were just so thrilled when those wise people gave us your name to celebrate this year, because you really have been such an inspiration. I just want to make sure the audience knows, Nadine took a flight at 3 o'clock this morning?
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock, okay, you had to get up at 3 from Tennessee, and then participated in a panel this morning, and she's here, and she doesn't seem to be flagging at all. Some 200 appearances every year. I run out of multisyllabic adjectives: indefatigable, unwearying. Thank you. Thank you for all you're doing, not just for ACTA and higher education, but for the nation. And I actually want to go further on a topic that Professor Kennedy raised. The ability you have shown to be able to talk to everybody, to engage everybody, and we're very grateful at ACTA for that. We're sometimes dismissed in the press. The conservative or the right-leaning organization ACTA, which is a code for, you can stop reading right here. Neither with ACTA nor any other organization that I know of have you ever let any kind of cliche or stereotype get in the way of that. And I thought I might invite you to talk a little bit about that ethic, what we can learn, and perhaps what we can learn about how we cultivate it.
Yes, and I will launch into that really important topic by showing that I do, in a cordial and respectful way, disagree even with people that I greatly admire and esteem. So I do disagree with Mitch Daniels' characterization of the ACLU. And, Monica alluded to fear, and all of us who have worked with organizations know that the press, I think, we all know that old cliche, if it bleeds, it leads. There's another cliche, man bites dog. And so the press tends to pick up on aspects of an organization that might not be fairly reflective of what's generally going on. So I don't want to go too far down that path, but just to say that the ethic of the ACLU is very much what I personally have always had, and that was that the ACLU will work with and collaborate with, not to mention represent and advocate for, any person, any organization, any government official, if we strongly agree on that particular issue, and if our perspective on that particular civil liberties issue can be advanced effectively by that collaboration. And it doesn't matter if we strongly disagree on many other issues. And I can give a prime example. Michael Meese, who is the son of Ed Meese, as you know, a very influential and powerful United States Attorney General, who advocated many policies that I personally and the ACLU as an organization disagreed with, one of which was alluded to by Amna, namely on the pornography issue. And Ed and I, by the way, he and I were great friends, not despite our disagreements, but precisely because of them, we were on the campus lecture circuit. And Mike was conveying, I appreciated Ed's warm greetings, very fond memories of doing that. But notwithstanding disagreements on some issues, we strongly agreed on other issues, one of which was campus free speech. And Ed and I collaborated in advocating for congressional legislation that would have protected free speech on private university campuses to the same extent that public universities are compelled to do that under the First Amendment. So I judge every person, every organization, and I shouldn't even use the word judge. I assess them in terms of potential interactions and collaborations very much on an issue-by-issue basis rather than this wholesale categorization, which seems to me to have gotten worse in the recent past, where there seems to be a desire, even a necessity, to try to attach a very oversimplified label to every organization and every individual. And let me give you another example. I was recently being interviewed by a journalist who said to me, well, Nadine, you are so identified with the ACLU, and you're so identified with FIRE, and the ACLU is this extreme left-wing organization, and FIRE is this extreme right-wing organization. How can you do it? And, I had to say, well, I respectfully disagree strongly with your characterization of both organizations, that, both of them, you may disagree with particular issues. Indeed, every thinking person has to, right? No thinking person could possibly agree with 100% of anything that is done by any organization. I think even this morning I mentioned something that FIRE had done recently that I respectfully disagreed with, and that's what we all owe each other. And I think we lose so much as a society and as individuals if we feel that we have to put somebody in some oversimplified box and then reject them and not collaborate with them, not even socialize with them, because it's a label that we reject. The ACLU and FIRE are so effective because they are, and I'm sure ACTA is the same way, labels don't matter. If it's somebody who will ally with you in advancing a common purpose that you share, it doesn't matter if there are other purposes that you don't share. And as an individual, I have to say my life has been so immeasurably enriched by friendships with, and I think of the prominent conservatives that I met through debating them, Ed Meese and Nino Scalia, as he asked me to call him, William F. Buckley. As Michael and I were reminiscing, I just really wonder whether these kinds of debates could even still take place on college campuses. I know that ACTA and others are trying to re-energize them.
This is one of the reasons why we are so emphasizing the Campus Debate and Discourse Alliance. And I realize I'm speaking to a Minnesota State champion debater from your earlier days, that this is one of the ways that we learn to disagree in a civil and respectful manner. And at the end of the day, might even find some common ground. I should also disclose that Nadine is sometimes seen sporting a red cap that says, "Make John Stuart Mill great again." And wonderful thing for us all to remember.
If I could say something else, I know this is probably preaching to the choir. I honestly don't know. I mean, is conservative possibly an accurate label for this organization? I mean, from the policies that I've read, to me as, say, civil liberties and pro-education organization. And that was something else that used to bother me a lot when I was head of the ACLU, because we would inevitably be described as a liberal organization, which I thought was equally inaccurate, and I still do, by the way, but we can talk about that afterwards. And from its earliest days, one of the brochures that the ACLU put out and continued to put out was, join the most conservative organization in America. Why? Because we are conserving the original values on which this country was founded. And in a more political sense, we have been in the Reagan building, and I think of Ronald Reagan, a conservative, famously talking about, conservatism is about keeping the government off the backs of people. And to me, that is a classic civil liberties position. So these labels, I think, really do more to create artificial barriers to human interaction and to productive collaboration in forging public policies that are for the benefit of all of us.
Yes. If I may, I realize I forgot to tell our audience to bring toothbrush and pajamas and sleeping bags. So I will be careful of your time, but I wonder if we could talk a little bit about the frontiers on the academy in the world of free speech and academic freedom. I've been musing a bit on this, and I was looking at the epigraph of your book. By the way, there's a signed copy for all of you in the gift bags. It's a wonderful book on the details, the nuts and bolts of freedom of speech. And you dedicate it to Sir Salman Rushdie, and you quote him. Let's see if I can get this right. Free speech is the only thing. It is life itself. I'm leaving a couple of pieces of that out. And that's indisputable. A society without freedom of speech is going to be, to use Robert Jackson's famous line, a graveyard with compelled opinion. Is it enough on the campus? We think of freedom of speech and freedom of expression, but those two pillars, do they also need intellectual diversity and institutional neutrality in order to stand? I worry about the echo chamber. In fact, I'll use a little Latin. This is, after all, ACTA. One of the most chilling phrases, it comes from Tacitus, solitudinem faciunt et pacem appellant. They wreak devastation, and they call it peace. And on campus, in so many places, it seems that we have got what is amounting to that graveyard that's come from a compelled opinion. Or if I'm being, a little more fun, Janis Joplin's great line, freedom's not just another word for nothing left to lose. How do we, am I right? And we've both disagreed and agreed, so you can tell me I'm wrong, but do we need the reinforcement in order to have that kind of educational institution that we need? Do we need the reinforcement of a absolute, genuine embrace of freedom of speech and academic freedom, the reinforcement that comes from a real drive towards making sure that there's a heterodoxy of opinions, and also an institution that's not saying, well, you can say anything you want, but let me tell you first what I believe?
I agree with everything that you've said, Michael. And this was actually to mention, because there is so much work to be done. It's why I get involved with a number of wonderful organizations. ACTA, FAIR, FIRE, ACLU have been mentioned, and now you give me a reason to mention Heterodox Academy. As many of you may know, the origin of that organization, which of course does wonderful work in the free speech, academic freedom space, but the origin was from the perspective of the pursuit of truth through science and social science research and studies that had been done by social scientists, including John Haidt at NYU, showing that the quality of research was degraded when you had people who just had a monolith in terms of their perspectives. And these social scientists were able to demonstrate that when you have homogeneous views on the part of the social scientists, they are not as rigorous in examining and critiquing each other's work. Therefore, each scholar does not live up to his or her full potential in scholarship and in teaching. And the same thing is, John Stuart Mill, a great hero of mine, but I also, as Michael knows, I usually wear the cap, but red didn't match, so but I also like to point out that scholars have recently done some very sophisticated studies using algorithms and looking at language patterns, and there seems to be a very strong consensus that his wife, Harriet Taylor, was a co-author of the central piece of that book. And I know that there have been very few eminent women philosophers, so I always want to give Harriet Taylor co-authorship credit, which, by the way, he came very, very close to doing, and scholars have debated why didn't he do it. Obviously, he was a great feminist because they also co-authored a famous book and openly co-authored a famous book about the rights of women, and she was very ill, and he wasn't able to consult with her right before the final. So there may have been very respectful reasons why she was not officially credited. But anyway, John Stuart Mill and Harriet Taylor argued in On Liberty that we cannot fully understand and therefore come to grips with, examine, consider adopting or consider rejecting another viewpoint unless that viewpoint is presented by somebody who really believes in it. Now, some of us can be pretty good devil's advocates, but I agree with Taylor and Mill that we should have what we now call steelman arguments to sharpen our own thinking. And it's not enough if we just go through the free speech motions of making the strongest argument that we can. I think that's part of the reason why I really enjoyed and am grateful to the Ed Mises and William F. Buckley's and Nino Scalia's for giving me the opportunity to refine my own thinking, and in some cases to, not on pornography, but on other issues, to sort of refine my thinking.
I realize
unrefined on that topic.
I realize we have really little time left in this wonderful discussion. I want to make sure that we're not keeping people unduly, but if we could just turn, at least briefly, to one other important question. I think you and I are both admirers of the C. Vann Woodward Committee report, this landmark from 1975 at Yale University, at a time when the shout-downs were starting and they subsided for a while and now they're back. But he writes that, of course, the university is the place where you can think the unthinkable and challenge the unchallengeable and discuss the unmentionable. But at the same time, he reminds us that shock, hurt, and anger are not things to be taken lightly. And if the two have to be taken in the same time, that freedom of expression will always have to take precedence. But he doesn't ignore the reality of what happens when basic civility and basic kindness and charity break down. So I guess the question that I'd like to take up, at least for a little while, we can continue this later, how do we get everything? How do we get that community that is going to be deeply respectful of the freedom of expression, recognizing that sometimes it hurts, but still able to integrate in a way that is conducive to education and to growth and character?
Well, we do that in a word through education and through free speech. There is absolutely no reason why we should not encourage, persuade, cajole ourselves, our students, and our colleagues to respect each other, and not only go through the motions of respect, but real respect in the sense of, I think a couple of the eloquent tributes talked about the importance of relating to each person as an individual. You give that person the benefit of the doubt of having the same decency that you have. And in fact, in my many debates against people with whom I've strongly disagreed on particular civil liberties issues, I really can't think of an exception to what I'm going to say now, which is if you dig deep enough, you share something profoundly in common. You share the same ultimate goals. I think really, I think of our national aspiration of liberty and justice for all. I have not met anybody who doesn't subscribe to those ideals. Now, they will have very different views of what is liberty, what is justice, how do we achieve those goals. But I think it's really important to emphasize what we have in common and to have the humility that you might learn something that will help you to have a better understanding, a more profound understanding of those concepts and also of strategies for advancing those concepts by listening to somebody else and engaging in a dialogue with them. So even though you have the right not to do that, you have the right to shout an epithet at them. Well, even the First Amendment might not go that far, but you have a right to say a lot of offensive things to them. That's not conducive. Certainly, it's not conducive to cordial, pleasant relations, but it's also not conducive to your maximum ability to maximally advance what is important to you. So to me, it's all intertwined, Michael, but we make that clear to members of our community, not through punitive hate speech codes, not through even mandatory civility codes, but we do it through the process of education, going through the same kind of explanation that you've given me an opportunity to offer.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think at this moment, as our board chair comes up on stage to wish us a good night, I have the enormous pleasure of presenting you and putting into your hand the Merrill Award trophy.
Thank you so much.